And welcome into another episode of Tiger Territory, part of the Foul Territory Network, a Detroit Tigers podcast. I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, is Cody Stavenhagen. And joining us is a man who likes his skies blue and his hats also blue. West Michigan Whitecaps play-by-play man, Dan Hasty. Dan, thanks for joining us. How's it going?
You know, I was told a long time ago, if you want to keep the hair you have, ditch the hats. And I have tried my best to follow that advice for at least the last decade or so. Boys, how you doing?
That's some good perspective and good advice. Dan Hasty, not a hat man. Did not know that.
Advice I definitely don't follow.
Used to be the one who was kicked, essentially had the hat on in school, got told to take it off, and that was a daily occurrence in school. But had to grow out of that when I decided to keep growing the hair, at least what I have left.
For sure. Well, Dan, thanks for taking some time and joining us here on Tiger Territory. We know you're a busy man calling Detroit Mercy basketball games, the Grand Rapids Gold, and the Grand Rapids Rise, which I just learned existed, a pro volleyball team out in GR.
Yeah, they started up last year. They're part of the Pro Volleyball Federation. It's the first major league women's volleyball league. So imagine volleyball's answer to the WNBA. They play out of Van Andel Arena. And I mean, it's literally the best volleyball players on the planet. And it's an 8-team league, and they come from everywhere. I mean, everywhere across the globe to come play. And I'll tell you what, after having done high school and college level volleyball, and then to go from that to essentially the major leagues, I was kind of equating it to, remember that old video game Pong? Not that we played it a lot as kids. It's kind of something like our parents
know of its existence. Yeah.
Yeah. So I imagine it would be like what our parents or grandparents felt like it was playing Pong. It was like describing Pong versus describing what happens to a pinball inside a pinball machine. It is that fast, and it is really, really fun.
That's cool. All right. Grand Rapids Rise. Be sure to go check them out. To transition into a little baseball talk here, Dan, we wanted to have you on because obviously you're heavily involved in the prospects world, and you get to see these guys and know these guys at kind of a unique time in their careers. I think that's fitting because we're right on the heels of Tarik Skubal winning the Cy Young Award. And I just wrote a story that began with Will Vest remembering Skubal's first outing at West Michigan. He came in, I believe, 2 on, 2 outs, struck a dude out, came out the next inning, struck out the side. Were you there? Do you remember Tarik Skubal's first outing? And what were your impressions of him at such a formative time?
I remember it well. There were not many appearances. I think we had Tarik Skubal throw more innings as a minor league rehab than we had during his time as an active roster player during the 2018 season. That was when he was part of the Whitecaps as an active player. So when he was there, he garnered a reaction that only few other players will garner. And typically, and this is kind of a behind the scenes, behind the curtain moment. So I hope your listeners will appreciate this. So as a broadcaster, typically we have the ability, and we have the vantage point of seeing the broadcasters in the other booths during the game. We share windows, we have doors, we can pop into each other's booths, we can talk. But during the actual live action, the only way we really can communicate is through looks, glances. And every so often, there is a player that draws the look, that draws a stare, that draws a reaction. And you know it when you see it. And it doesn't come along very often. But I've seen it a handful of times. I've seen it for Jackson Jobe. I've seen it for Riley Green. I've seen it for Max Clark. I remember the day I saw it for Tarik Skubal. It's when one of those broadcasters sees the 97, 98 mile an hour fastball that runs over that sliver of the outside corner with 2 on, 2 outs, bases loaded, and there's nothing that a hitter could possibly do about it. And that broadcaster just leans back in his chair. He takes a deep breath. The cheeks puff out. He just looks at you and knows that he just watched a major league, not just a major league player, but a very good, impactful major league player. And there's a big difference between those two.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine I was gonna actually ask like who else got the look, but you answered it right there with names that have validated it and also looking forward. I was gonna ask, maybe that Scooble's the answer to this one. Has there been a guy that you've broadcasted and seen just how he works and any of the stuff that maybe doesn't just make it to to the actual game that you would like? You put on the call for that you're like telling your buddies, I'm telling you, this guy is going to make it. Maybe not become a superstar. It doesn't necessarily have to be to that level, but like this guy, I'm telling you, there's something here and it like, it's going to work. You're going to see him in the old English D. Is there any kind of name or names that come to mind for something like that?
There are two. There's a position player and a pitcher, one of whom was a much more challenging one to defend than the other because of how their minor league career went. But again, these players did not garner that look because they were either struggling at our level or they were more of an unknown. The pitcher was a guy who was taken very late in the draft out of a very small school who had a big time changeup. Didn't have a fastball that really ran up into the high 90s, but he had command and he had pitchability, and they thought they could develop more life on that fastball. That was Bo Brisky. And they thought that they had something with him. And once and so like so many others, when they got him into their pitching lab, they were able to make such a seismic change and improvement with him. And it also bears mentioning that Bo Brisky has a tremendous work ethic. And the Tigers have done a really good job identifying players that have that trait, that quality about them. Because, look, at the end of the day, player development, and it really comes down to two things. Because aside of your Bryce Harpers, your Alex Rodriguez's, and the guys who are taken at the top of the draft, the special players, if you will. Most guys taken between, say, the 15th pick in the draft and the end of the draft, they're similarly talented. There's not a whole lot of difference by and large because it is a thinking person's game. How do you think out these situations? What it comes down to are two main differences. Number one, the work ethic of that particular player. If you don't have that, none of this matters. Number two, the quality of that major league team's player development system. If you have both, you're great. You're golden. The Tampa Bay Rays, the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Atlanta Braves to a certain extent. These teams have been taking players late in the draft, early in the draft, it doesn't matter, and have been molding them into contributors, no matter where they get taken. And it's not like they're doing anything special. They're not identifying these great talents. They're just saying, this guy has a skill set that we can mold. The Tigers are now leaning into what their superpower is. That's molding pitching. They're doing it with Bo Brisky. So he was, for me, the big pitching name that felt that way. The position player was Parker Meadows. And that was a much tougher sell to a lot of people during 3 years in West Michigan, where he just couldn't stand the deep dimensions of the ballpark. And Parker, if you're listening, the fences are coming in this year. But when it comes to Parker, he was so raw. I mean, we're so far removed from the fact that his nickname was Baby Giraffe. He is all grown up now. He has turned from little Jeffrey into Jeffrey Dollars now. I mean, he is all grown up. And now he carries such a great ability. And, you know, I always think about what value does a player provide on a day in, day out basis when that player goes 0 for 4 at the plate? What tangible value do they bring? Because there has been so many iterations of baseball teams, the Tigers included about 10 years ago, where if a player went 0 for 4, they didn't bring a whole lot of value. But this team, especially this year, brought a number of players that brought a whole lot of value on days where they didn't hit. They were in a lot of ways the polar opposites of some of those early 2010s Tigers teams that were very talented hitters, but also flawed in other areas. This team was so well-rounded that it would, I mean, I really do believe that this year's Detroit Tigers team would have also given that 2013 team absolute fits because of just how pesky and difficult they were.
That is really great stuff, Dan, and kind of leads me to something I wanted to ask you, because I get asked a lot, you know, what are the Tigers doing differently? Why have they become better in player development? And that's so often a difficult question to answer. So much of it is behind the scenes. So much of it the team wants to be a little bit secretive about for good reason. So much of it is just kind of vague a lot of the times. But from your role, is there anything specifically you have seen or felt that you think has begun to make a difference in this system?
I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but you remember about 5 years ago when we started hearing about the Tiger Way, where we heard about how everything needs to be uniform and signs need to be the same at all the different levels. Okay, well, that's fine. That's good. But over the last 2 years, once Scott Harris took over, the Tiger Way got redefined and exceptionally specialized. And what I mean by that is the Tiger Way as it was did a lot of universal treatment of players throughout the system. A lot of cases were handled in a similar way. A lot of development was handled in a similar fashion. Now, what it feels like is that things are tailored to each individual player with a lot more thought and a lot more consideration for each individual player's needs to optimize every single skill set. It doesn't feel anymore like this should work for everyone, as opposed to let's make a specific plan for players 1 through 30 on every roster and look at the guy who was taken in round 1 and every other player all the way through the guy who was taken in round 20. And that goes from sports science. Georgia Giblin does a great job. That goes to dietary. There are so many people focused on what they're putting in their bodies right now. I've never seen so much focus putting on what they eat. And I used to only see that with some of the great organizations. And I think if Tigers fans wonder where they are putting a lot of their resources, trust me when I tell you, infrastructure is where a lot of these resources are allocated, because we have seen seismic differences that put them on par with some of the great developmental systems in our league. Ones that we thought were fairly superfluous. We thought that they were unnecessary. But if you want to compete and you want to develop players like the Dodgers, like the Rays, you got to do the same things that they're doing. Well, guess what? The Tigers have entered the chat.
Yeah, I almost, like, Cody called a lot of that stuff vague. I almost kind of look at it as, for lack of a better term, like, kind of boring. Like it's not necessarily the most exciting thing. I don't know if his stories would get a lot of clicks, like talking about, the nutrition of the team. You know what I mean? It's important, but it's also not like the most riveting stuff. But baseball is a game made up of some of the not most riveting stuff being some of the most important things. You mentioned this postseason run for the 2024 team. I'm curious, somebody in your position who has seen a lot of these guys, obviously not every player, but seen a lot of them. And the theme of the year was the young team, right? Seen a lot of them kind of come through your gates, if you would. What kind of connection do you feel to the major league team? I guess specifically the players on it, especially when you see them undergo some level of success that the franchise, obviously a franchise you grew up loving and rooting for, like, experience success not seen in a relatively large amount of time, given the scope.
Well, I think it changes as time goes on. I think as you get older and you get to know these guys better and better, especially the ones who had been grinding it out at your level for multiple years, you find yourself rooting just as much, if not more so, for the individuals to find success, because some of them are now having moved on to other organizations. So, heck, the Philadelphia Phillies, I think, had 5 or 6 different players who used to play in West Michigan. So I got a chance to see a bunch of those guys. I mean, Nick Castellanos was playing. I mean, it was Gregory Soto who was playing. Cody Clemens was there. There was a ton of guys who were out there. Spencer Turnbull was on that team. So there's a lot of those guys. But as it pertains to the Tigers, literally every single player on that playoff roster had played with one another in the minor leagues at some point. Every single one of them. And it really felt like that was a low-key superpower for the Tigers. So throw out the payroll. On top of that, they had something going for them that I think people didn't give them enough credit for. And that was AJ Hinch having cracked a fairly significant code that had not been cracked by many people before him in baseball. Now, it's easier when you have a Cy Young Award winner as kind of the linchpin of your rotation, but he hacked the system. He hacked the system.
Great way to put it.
To get the Tigers into the playoffs. The fact that he wasn't the AL Manager of the Year is preposterous. I mean, he literally found a cheat code to the game, and he got them in. There's no inexplicable reason why the Tigers should have made the playoffs this year. They shouldn't have, but they did. And AJ Hinch has so much to be proud of. And I will tell you this, based on how they played down the stretch, I thought they were going to win the World Series. I truly felt that they had discovered a flaw in the system and they were going to ride it all the way to a title. And even despite them not carrying that through, given the payroll and given the fact that we are in this league of haves and have-nots, and I know I'm straying from the point, so I'll get back to it in a second, is that I do think that this is going to be a model that is, if it's not already happening, going to get studied by teams around the game for the next handful of years. And we will see copycats on this. When a team starts to fade towards the end of a year, you can bet your house that this is going to be their chess move and their desperation play to try and get themselves back in. But back to your point about how it feels to see these guys make it in. Look, there's nothing better than seeing guys have that success at the major league level. It's such a reward, especially for the guys who struggled and grinded it out and failed expectations at some point along the way, because those are the guys who you have conversations with in the dugout and whose families you have conversations with. And we live in this age of social media. I can't tell you how many times I saw social media posts dragging guys like Parker Meadows. And he was a minor leaguer, for crying out loud. He wasn't even a major leaguer. I don't believe that a minor leaguer should have to deal with that sort of thing. I don't think that's warranted. I think if you're a major league player, okay, fine. Like, you're a professional, you're at the highest level. Okay, whatever. People are going to talk. But the minor league level, what are we doing here? So, I mean, and he's not the only one. He's not immune to that. But I will say this. He and so many others like him have learned a lot about how to tune things out and how to thrive amidst this world we live in and become better and find ways to have success because of it. And that's another thing that you get really proud of when you watch these guys.
That's well said, Dan. As Kieran put it, like, a lot of great players have kind of come through your gates there in West Michigan. There were several of them this year. I want to make sure we say the name Jaden Ham at some point in this podcast, because I don't know if we're going to even get into a full breakdown of him. The big tickets were probably Max Clark and Kevin McGonigal. What kind of stood out to you in your time watching each of those guys?
Well, the thing that stood out to me most about Jaden was the fact that we had him the entire season. I think that was probably the biggest thing. I think it's also a reason to give Erie some credit, because they had depth to a point in their rotation. They also stayed healthy enough in their rotation, as did Toledo, so they didn't have too many moving parts, that we were able to keep a guy like Ham the entire year. So that was a nice bonus. We did not expect to keep that guy as well as we did, as long as we did, because typically when a guy becomes a top 100 prospect on your watch, and under the previous regime, we would never have him long enough to establish that kind of value. And we always sort of wondered, why not keep him there longer? If you establish yourself as a top 100 prospect, why in the world would you move him? What an organizational asset Jaden Ham becomes by just letting him cook. Just let him marinate for a little bit and let him become something of tremendous value to the rest of Major League Baseball. I promise you, he is worth more as a top 100 prospect dominating in West Michigan than he is getting overmatched in Double-A with an ERA of 4.5 in June and learning on the fly. He has plenty of time for that. So this idea of being aggressive and moving a guy, we're noticing now that guys get moved a lot less on their typical mom and pop statistics and a lot more on their advanced numbers and analytics. So we look a lot less to see what a guy's ERA is and what a guy's whip is. And now we're looking at a lot more things that we don't often get privy to. So, we learn a little bit more about that. But Jaden Ham, phenomenal. I would be stunned if we ever saw him in West Michigan again. But Max Clark, Kevin McGonigal, I mean, those guys were just so tremendous. And Max Clark, starting with him, Max Clark is such a fascinating human being, for starters. And I don't want to put too much on a kid who's, 19, 20 years old. But when you spend time with Max, you don't feel like you're with the average 19 or 20-year-old. You feel like you are spending time with the face of not only the Detroit Tigers in 2 to 3 years, but one of the faces of Major League Baseball in 2 to 3 years. That's what it feels like. Just spending time with him, he has a way about him that, when you ask guys that come out of high school about their goals, and I've had a handful of them to this point, sometimes the answers revolve around statistics. I want to steal 60 bases. I want to hit 300. I want to hit 15 home runs. Sometimes they revolve around cliches. I want to leave it all out there on the field. I want to be a good teammate, blah, 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 blah. But you ask Max, and he starts talking about setting up an LLC so he can get wheels in motion for a charity that his wife is going to run to support and combat mental health. And you're just like, who is this?
Wow.
And we've never seen anything like it. I mean, he's the first person that has just had just throngs of people waiting outside the ballpark for him, and he gets it. It's just, he's so beyond his years, and he's just been a joy to have around. So I'm just so excited for the people of Detroit to get to see him when he's fully ready, because he is going to change the game in Detroit. As for McGonigal, McGonigal, we didn't get to see a whole lot of Kevin McGonigal. He was with us. He got hurt. Everything about his analytics say that this is a really, really interesting offensive player to watch. I know that he and Max are super tight. So I know that Max has all the respect for him in the world. I think he's a really good yin to Max Clark's yang. I think they very much complement one another. So I'll be really interested to see how that evolves, to see if it kind of looks like the old Riley and Torque dynamic from back in the day, and to see kind of how that evolves. But, I mean, you can't argue with the numbers that he put up. I mean, Florida State League MVP. I mean, that's a hard league to hit in. And Kevin McGonigal just hit the tar out of the baseball. So between those guys, and then you've got Thayron Liranzo, who literally hits the ball so hard that you just kind of do that like DeAndre Jordan slam dunk over Brandon Knight face. You're like, ooh, gross. Like, it's like scary violent. So there's that. And Josue Briseño, I mean, there's just so many guys, and bizarrely, all of those guys feel like they're kind of lined up towards West Michigan. Liranzo could go to Double-A, but all those guys, hypothetically, could be in West Mich, and all those guys are going to absolutely love what we're doing to the dimensions out there. I can promise them that.
Well, Dan, you had actually seen Liranzo when he was in the Dodgers system a little bit, right? So you've watched him for longer than most.
And surprisingly, he was nowhere near the player that we saw once the Tigers got a hold of him. He was, I think he was like 5 for 60 against us. Wow. And we remember looking around going like, really? Like, this is the guy? Like, and we knew he was a highly ranked Dodgers prospect, but I think he had hit a home run against West Michigan on the 4th of July. And there was a couple times where he barreled up balls, but he just had that way about him where you're just like, okay, it's the Dodgers. Like, they'll optimize him. He's just not ready yet. So when they made, the deal and we saw it was Liranzo, we're like, well, all right. So yeah, I guess. And then he comes over and he turns into Barry Bonds. I mean, he was literally the best player in the league from the moment he got there towards the end of the season. He was just a destroyer of worlds. It was the last thing any of us thought we would see. It was from the left side and the right side. And I mean, just so much fun, just tons of walks and catcher / first base profile, switch, hit. Essentially, it's like they cloned Briseño in right. Some way. So now they have sort of an embarrassment of riches in that way. And so it sort of leads into the Briseño conversation. So they send both of them to the Arizona Fall League, right?
Right.
And I think it's because, especially with Briseño, he ends up missing a lot of the season. He has the knee injury, right? So they want to give him more ABs. And I think at some level, they might look around and say, we might have more than what we need. And if we're going to make an impact move, we might have a better chance adding that via trade than we do going out and spending a lot of money, right? So where do we have organizational strength? Maybe one of those two guys. And look, this is just me talking. So they might want to see how those two guys look against advanced pitching. Some of the best prospects in Major League Baseball are in the Arizona Fall League. Based on how they played, I don't think they're going to move either of them. So I think they want to move both of them now. So if anything, that may have made the decision even more difficult. But look, it's a good problem to have. If nothing else, I think both of those guys improved their status tremendously, especially Briseño.
So you've mentioned the renovations a couple times at LMCU ballpark, and I love things that coincide. And so you have all these prospects that we just talked about, and it's going to come with them being showcased in a new look for the ballpark over there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on and kind of what's going to be so special about what the fans will see next year?
Yeah, so this is phase 2 of the West Michigan Whitecaps renovation. They just completed most of phase 1 over the course of the last couple of years. They debuted the brand new locker room this past year. So the players ended up getting a new space, state-of-the-art locker room, a new training room. When they come back this season, they will have a new workout space, new batting tunnels. That'll be part of this phase, the second phase of the renovation. So they'll be coming back to a whole new area for themselves to train in over the course of this year. And on top of that, just today, the new field installed. So they got rid of all the old sod. They installed all the new sod. So it'll drain better. So shorter rain delays, which is good. And on top of that, they took the bullpens off the field. And that's something that actually is happening throughout all of minor league baseball. Bullpens, I grew up with Old Tiger Stadium and the bullpens being in the field of play. Well, those days are gone in minor league baseball. They're moving them off the field. So they're moving them to right center field. And the way that the architectural footprint is laid out, the only way to do that, and this is my favorite part, is that they have to move the fences in and make it more conducive to home runs to house the bullpens.
Sounds
Thank
familiar.
you, Major League Baseball. So they end up moving the fences in. And I mean, look, West Michigan, one of my favorite places, one of my favorite ballparks in the world, one of the worst ballparks to hit home runs in. And any hitter will tell you that. It has been studied. I think Baseball America put out an article talking about just how hard and how rare it is to hit home runs there. I have, as a broadcaster, I have called more walk-off balks than I have called walk-off home runs in my time as the Whitecaps broadcaster. So just to give you an idea of how rare it is to hit those. So now what was a power alley that registered a tick over 390 feet to left and right center field now will probably come in somewhere closer to about 365 feet, which is a huge difference.
That's amazing. And we're already up on time here, but I wanted to be sure we get this story in here because a few years ago I went to West Michigan. I think it was my first time there. And I think I told you, I wanted to talk to Lance Parrish at the time about the last night at Tiger Stadium. Which went on to be a story that, every now and then if someone stops me and is like, hey, I remember this story, thank you, they're talking about that story. It was a meaningful night to a lot of people. And I think you had said, hey, I happened to be there. And you went on to tell me a really good story. So let's recap that for the viewers. What was it like for you the last night at Tiger Stadium?
Oh, gosh. Well, I didn't find out I was going until the night before. I don't know how, but my dad was able to get tickets, and we were supposed to be in one of those obstructed view seats right behind one of those huge poles, right? And so naturally, we did not sit there. We sat somewhere else. I don't know how, because if anybody remembers that game, it was like the only game that entire decade that the ballpark was literally full. I mean, I'm talking every single seat. But we found 2 open seats that were, I mean, am I going to get in trouble for this? It was literally 10 rows back from the Tigers on deck circle, third base side. And I remember just, I mean, nobody came and kicked us out. So that's where we were. And so, you know, got a chance to be there for that game. And look, I mean, that was just so formative. I mean, I got to skip school for every opening day as a kid, and to be there for that and to watch a full ballpark for the first time. I mean, I didn't get 84. I mean, I'm part of the, you know, Taylor Swift tortured Tigers department. Like, I was born in 1985. Okay. I missed it. And so to have not been a part of what so many people just slightly older than myself got to experience, that was the biggest moment of Tigers history as far as I was concerned. So to be there for that was really special, and to see it and to have felt it, but to have seen the players walk out from center field. I mean, and then to be working with some of these guys later on, and Lance Parrish and Alan Trammell, it's just, I mean, that's one of the surreal parts of all of this, is to actually go back to them and get their recount of the whole situation, you know, whether it's Lance or Tram or Gibby, when we get a chance to see him. Everybody's got different accounts of that day, and every single one of them are as surreal as they are special.
Yeah, Dan, you'll get a kick out of this. I still have an autographed Robert Fick baseball from when they came. I think it was 2002. It was the infamous Mother's Day where my littlest brother got lost, and when we were at the ballpark. So we don't have to recap that, maybe a different time. But yeah, Robert Fick autograph from that. And then as a youth in T-ball, somehow my dad found a Cecil Fielder wood bat use size. So I swung that in T-ball.
That is perfect. So I kind of jogged my memory, and Cody, maybe this is the story that I told you about Robert Fick. So Fick has come back a number of times. He's a Whitecap before he was a Tiger, and he was great. I mean, he dominated the Midwest League. And he, that night, autographed a baseball. He came back out of the dugout in his Hawaiian shirt, and I remember I got him to sign a ball for me, and he made it out. He signed it. He dated it. And then he came back. I saved it. He came back all those years later to West Michigan, and I had it in the press box. And on the air, I got to bring it out and show it to him on the air. And he was just like, this is really, really cool. And it was fun just to be able to not only relive a moment, but to be able to show him like a little moment in time. And that was, you know, a chance to just say, you know, hey, like, not only was this you, but like, this was you and I in this moment. And like, just to have that little snapshot, because look, there are so many moments for kids that endear themselves to baseball. And Robert Fick became I became a fan of his for life because of that moment. I mean, there's nothing he could have ever done that would have made me think any less of him, because I was able to share a moment like that with Robert Fick. So, you know, that's why we love baseball. That's because we get those connections with players and we get those moments with them. And that's something that I hope stays in the game forever.
Didn't you also play catch with one of the pitchers, like over the dugout?
Wow, you have a great memory. So yes, I actually did. I was thinking about that too. That was Doug Brocale.
Okay.
And so that was a situation where he looked up and he saw me in the stands, and I had a ball and a pen. and I just kind of held it up, and he had a glove on, and I threw it to him. And then my plan was to throw the pen as well for him to sign it, but he thought we were playing catch. So next thing I know, the ball was coming back towards me, and I'm looking around. There's people from every side. So he's a major league pitcher. He's not going to be inaccurate. So thankfully, it's coming right to me. So yes, I got a chance to play catch over the Tigers dugout. I think it was about, it wasn't even more than 20 minutes before first pitch. I was like, wow, it's dangerous now. Like, this is a liability in 2024. But no, Doug broke hail. But eventually, I did get a chance to throw him the pen.
That's really good. No wonder you're working in baseball now, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's an apple not falling too far from the tree. And again, like, that's how these things happen. I mean, yeah. I can promise you this. There are so many other people that are in similar positions to what I do that had these sorts of things happen to them along the way. And that's what endeared them to the game. So to be able to share these kinds of stories, I promise you, every one of us has these types of moments. And I'm sure you guys have them too. So to be able to reflect on that, it's so much fun. And it's one of those things I always love asking people, what was the first moment that you had that you realized that you loved baseball? And look, the Tigers were a rough watch for a long time, but Old Tiger Stadium provided some really cool opportunities. I mean, whether it was just being able to be on the rail and get to talk to players, to get autographs. I mean, Bobby Higginson was like my favorite player as a kid. And I used to go and I was on like a, I wouldn't say a first name basis, but like a face basis with him. And that was the coolest thing to me as like an 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid. So, it was just, those were the kinds of things that got me hooked. And I know that everybody has a different way that they got hooked in, whether it was a parent or a best friend or being at the field. But I think it's probably a combination of all of those things. But there's so many different things that hook us into this game, and we're lucky we get a chance to do what we do.
Yeah, very well said. Nothing's going to top that. So that's as good a time as any to wrap up here. Dan, want to thank you for your time. You guys can listen to this wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, you can see us on YouTube. So go to Tiger Territory on YouTube, be able to watch this full podcast if you are listening to us wherever you get your podcast. So for Cody Stavenhagen and Dan Hasty, I'm Kieran Steckley. Thank you for listening and have a great day.